Okay, in 1974, a group of 4 scientists discovered this fossil in Ethiopia. At first glance, it resembles a rudimentary human skeleton, but you might recognize it by its more common name, Lucy, the earliest fossilized evidence of a human ancestor. We can learn a lot about Lucy by looking at the bones we found, but I want to look at one of her bones in particular. That one. It's called the distal radius, and scientists say it played a key role in her mobility in the trees. Here it is in a picture, straight off of her arm. What's fascinating and also a little conflicting about Lucy's skeleton is that some of the damage done to her bones was used by scientists to determine her cause of death. The cause? Falling out of a tree. But hold on, that doesn't make any sense. To explain why, let's have another look at her skeleton. Okay, so we've got the distal radius, and according to scientists, that was important for her tree climbing abilities. But what we also have here is a femur and a sturdy pelvis, both strong signs that Lucy was bipedal, or walked on 2 legs. Now I can already hear what you're thinking, big deal, maybe Lucy was just built different. But no, the evolutionary implications of this go all the way back to the origin of Homo sapiens and beyond. The origin of humans may seem like an easy question to answer. Obviously we came from some monkey or chimp or some earlier form of hairy, opposably thumbed primate. And while we do have a lot in common with our common ancestors of chimps, the history of where humans come from likely has to do with what's called the Savanna hypothesis. The Savanna hypothesis poses that humans' ground-based lifestyle evolved directly from our distant ancestors' way of life in the trees. And for this to happen, there needed to have been a gradual transition of these ancient humans from a place with many trees to somewhere in close proximity with significantly fewer trees, referred to as a savanna. But how do we know that humans came down from the trees and not up from the ground? Well, to answer this, let's have a look at our closest neighbor over on the phylogenetic tree of life, chimps.
If there was as many people, or chimps as there were people, it would be chaos. You wouldn't be able to leave your house.
Humans and chimpanzees had a common ancestor between them somewhere between 13 and 4 million years ago. There's a lot of gray area as far as the precise split of each species, as is with any species, but we know they're closest to us in the taxonomic chain. Chimps mostly live in trees, or at least in areas with a lot of trees, and humans, on the other hand, live on the ground. Now, there had to be something between us that went from the trees down to the ground, and the reason we know it's not the other way around is because of data on human wrist anatomy when compared with chimps, bonobos, and gorillas. For current humans to have persisted through our closer tree-dwelling ancestors, we would have to share traits with the next primate over on the tree, the gorilla, who walks on all 4s on the ground with its wrists, but is more distant from humans. Since only a small amount of gorillas possess the key features in common with human wrists, we can infer that we came down from the trees and evolved into bipedalism, not from it. Using this knowledge, we can view Lucy as a transitional fossil instead of an organic human. Lucy belongs to the taxa called the Australopithecus, which dominated regions of East Africa around 4 to 3 million years ago. Going back to the distal radius, we know that scientists say that Lucy spent at least some time in the trees, but further bone research confirmed that it likely wasn't her primary living space. She and other members of A. afarensis exhibited more pressure on the thumb, whereas modern-day chimps and orangutans tend to put pressure on the bones of their 4 other fingers. This brings us to the first possible reason that early humans may have left the trees, because they were growing farther apart. When we compare the timeline of primate evolution with the patterns of the Earth, we find ourselves in the late Neogene, early Quaternary area. This time period enjoyed global cooling and significantly increased grasslands, especially in Africa. Needless to say, habitats became more varied, and tree dwellers may have needed to make a change. This could explain why Lucy might have died falling out of a tree, because she just missed the jump. Another possible explanation for why the earliest humans set out for the savannas is the fact that we sleep so little compared to other primates. Most taxa that are considered to be ancestors of humans weighed a lot, and given that not all branches are sturdy enough for multiple 100-something pound ape men to sleep on, we may have been forced to adapt. This couples well with another theory that as space in the trees became limited, early humans got competitive about who got to stay. Perhaps the better climbers and berry scavengers were the ones who got to stay, and everyone else with less able wrists was forced out. Sorry, Lucy. This also makes phylogenetic sense as far as where the actual split occurred between humans and chimps. Eating habits of early humans also could have incentivized them to come down to the ground. Data from A. afarensis skulls, jaws, and teeth bones supports that over time our ancestors may have become more carnivorous rather than sticking to berries and convenient food found in trees. It's worth noting that this may have been a consequence of overcrowding, but it also could have been an independent event. It's hard to know for sure. But it also brings us to some of the criticisms of the Savanna hypothesis within the scientific community. While there seems to be many logical reasons that early humans came down from the trees and into the savannas, some scientists are still a little skeptical. For one, human bones simply don't fossilize that well. We're lucky that we have the records that we have, but they could be a little bit biased towards African regions. Some scholars speculate that bipedal human-like ancestors were already in areas of Europe and Asia before African hominids even left the trees. Critics point to other members of the Homo taxa that dominated Europe a few million years ago, such as Neanderthals. While it's entirely possible that Neanderthals migrated all the way from Africa to Europe over the course of a couple million years, it seems a little more likely that some form of prehistoric human had already been there before that. The fossil record's bias towards the savannas is one of the biggest weaknesses of the hypothesis, but there's more. Some people also argue that the existence of both bipedalism and able climbing abilities in early species means that early humans may have had the ability to live on the ground, but still chose not to. Lucy, for example, has an angled femur, which means that she most likely walked on her hind legs, but other taxa, such as Auroran, have been shown to have both sturdy wrists and femurs as well. Additionally, the discoveries of human ancestors in savanna regions with little to no trees leaves a large gap between where we are now and our closest ancestor with chimps and other primates that lived in more wooded areas. One other criticism that can be drawn from the savanna hypothesis is that there's no real scientific definition for a savanna. I mean, the general idea is pretty commonly accepted. It's a place with a lot of grass and sporadic tree growth. But a lot and sporadic are kind of vague terms. No one's really sat down and quantified how dense trees have to be for a habitat to be considered a savanna officially. Additionally, some African areas are considered savannas but have really decent tree growth, just with a fewer number of tree species than your given rainforest. This, combined with the fact that many of these trees didn't actually have much fruit to offer the local herbivores, implies that the shift in habitat from trees to land was probably a lot more gradual, if it even really happened at all. The great thing about science is that we're always learning about new things we didn't know we didn't know. Though we can observe all the fossils available to us and pinpoint where each came from geographically, we may never know the exact reason why or where precisely we split off from our primate ancestors. The little evidence we have is enough to show some relationship between climbers and land dwellers, and since we know humans and chimps have a common ancestor in the ballpark of 6-ish million years, it may make sense that over time certain things could have incentivized us to adapt a new lifestyle. Whether it was internal pressure from the species, or a decrease in trees, or a change in appetite, or even a combination of multiple things while other early Homo species were frolicking in Europe, all we know for sure is that right now, we're here on the ground. And unless you want to climb up into a tree and live there as a way of spiting the scientific consensus, the best thing you can do is make the most of your time on the ground. And also thank Lucy for falling out of that tree millions of years ago.